Part 4. A Splash of Cold Water. I didn't mean, over the course of various episodes, to talk too much about what people are currently calling artificial intelligence or just AI. And I really had resolved not to talk about it too directly over the years because it was just another thing happening. But I've come to realize, musing over these different phases of my life and these different periods of revolution that I've experienced, that I'm in the middle of the eye of the storm of this happening. None of what I'm thinking is a referendum on the meaning of the technology. It's just a realization that this is more and more of what I've experienced before. And when I move away from the randomness of different lawsuits and news stories and projects and experiences with what people are calling AI, I'm seeing the echoing sounds of things I've felt before, finally making me aware of both the opportunity and the dull repetition of what it all represents. This is Jason Scott Talks His Way Out of It, a podcast about technology, history, and getting myself out of debt. Thanks to Daniel Boyd, Jeff Atwood, and the hundreds of other supporters on Patreon and elsewhere who have been supporting me and helping me get out of debt. Like bulletin boards, like the internet, like the World Wide Web, artificial intelligence and intense processing of visual, textual, and moving image data has been going on for decades. If you know which words to use and which figures and academics to look for, you'll find papers going back 100 years discussing what technologies and processes might be utilized to analyze large amounts of information and visual data to produce brand new or modified or summarized versions with increasing amounts of power as we had more and more storage, more and more computing power, and more focus on both an academic and marketing level of using machines to do both creative and analytical work. You'll see there's nothing really new about it. But what changed? Experiments and demos that were available to fully functioning applications and websites that gave anybody who wandered in the ability to see what was going on. This flipping of the switch from theory to practice is causing incredible amounts of fear, paranoia, accusation, lawsuits, and bizarre declarations, promises, ideas, as crowds of people ingest, interpret, and describe what they think it all means. For myself, the whole process became a matter of seeing experiments go by over the years. For example, there was a series where various SIGGRAPH, that is, computer graphics analytical processes, were summarized. You could see that somebody had come up with a way to take a photo or a 3D mesh and create an automatic blueprint for a 3D balanced version, volumetric shape. Or being able to take 1,000 faces and generate new ones from them. Maybe be able to simulate water or the passage of gravity in various directions using algorithms. I would watch these go by, and I would be interested, neither really excited or dismayed. They were just the simple, often confined algorithms being created by academics in the pursuit of understanding how to simulate the world. In many cases, these would simply end up as much more interesting 3D plugins so that a movie did waves better or was able to do a psychedelic sequence utilizing some of this technology. you can find so many predecessors, especially in the microcomputer age, with the idea of a machine that can be given data and produce something perhaps human or human-like. Eliza was the most famous of the psychoanalytical programs, but there's Apple II floppies that will let you simulate life or a war or a person and let you interact with them, just not in a way that is eerily true. Simply amusing. Little Computer People by Activision enabled you to watch a world take place, years before The Sims did the same. The idea that now we can have a being that gives the illusion of being real, beating underneath the text that we have, comes simply from doing what we were doing before at greater, maybe unfathomable amounts of analysis. Because I've seen all of this play out before, I focus both on how I feel and how I notice society feels. For myself, I'm fascinated by new things. I'm still extremely curious as to where things go. Being given a toy that lets me type in phrases and have it try to make an image that looks like what I'm saying, or interacting with a constantly changing world where I tell it to tell me a story, and the story is okay, pretty convincing, and responding to almost everything that I say. These are all extensions of things I dreamed about everywhere from a game called Scribblenauts, which let you put in almost any noun and use it to solve puzzles, or the text adventures that I had in my youth that promised but did not actually have a world behind it. A fleeting moment in my single digits when I played adventure and I convinced myself that that world that lived beneath that text was real and ready to respond to whatever I put in. It didn't take long to pierce that envelope, to realize, no, it was a database of words and directions and some canned responses to some potential words while giving very general errors in other cases. When I played an adventure game generator a few years back, it was using text analysis, and I could have fun with it, although within a very short time, it wasn't hard to see where it was making up something out of nothing and getting progressively worse at it. Now we're at another level. We're at a level where giving very strange or unusual requests are still followed. Even to me, somebody with years of experience, I almost hesitate to make unreasonable requests, thinking in some way that it's unfair to ask this machine to do something. I find the challenge of imagining weird and unusual aesthetics, descriptions of places and people overlaid with my memory of descriptions and art terms going back throughout my life, to be fascinating. Playing a game of Twister on a floor is not an entire lifestyle, but it's interesting for an evening. What I enjoyed the most in some ways was playing the game of imagining stranger and stranger art aesthetics and having the machine each time respond with an image that came pretty close to what I was getting at, and then me using that as a reason to stretch my imagination even farther. I prided myself on being the kind of person with a very deep and wide imagination. I found where it had gotten a little rusty over the years, that my imagination was something that needed to be exercised as well. In the same way that a barbell set or a treadmill isn't a walk in the woods or a factory job, these aren't artistic worlds being drawn by humans. These are algorithms feeding in from an enormous amount of data and analyzed using specialized chips that only a few years ago translated cryptocurrency into heroin. Now, we're seeing these analytical engines move in every direction with very few brakes, very few guardrails. This is chaos onto a society. But I've seen it all before. Instead of building up anger and finger pointing and name calling, I'm personally awash watching the revolution happen after I've had 50 years of practice, of watching my worldview get shaken up by divorce, computers, smartphones, travel, life, death, disease, and love. In this realm that I live in now, watching everybody twist themselves in the current year over what the potentials of artificial intelligence are, of watching large language models get installed on ancient and small laptops and have almost, if you squint, a sense of being sort of alive, or at least responsive. I watch it not to judge, but to remind myself life is worth living. New experiences are worth studying. Finding out both about the technology and the toys that fall into our laps, but the way we as humans understand them, internalize them, rebel against them. It's like a do-over for me. I was too young at 11 to realize the pros and cons of an online life. I was too focused on myself in my 20s to try to find a balance between websites and walks in the park. But maybe this time, a half century in, the little boy who loved computers will enjoy the ride, but know inherently that these computers will never love him back. Here's to curiosity, to imagination, and to people. This is Jason Scott Talks His Way Out of It, thanks to James Bekoyanu, Ernie Hershey, Michael Rubin, Dilip Reddy, Sean Kelly, Trixie the Cat, Martin, Symbionts, Benjamin Guts, and Anonymous, along with the hundreds of other supporters on Patreon and elsewhere who have been supporting me and helping me get out of debt. Thank you for indulging a 4-part overview of this. I'm not sure I fully captured the idea of how much technology has driven my growth as a person, but learning how this cyclical feeling, dating from when I was very young to now, pervades my experience with technology has been very helpful for me. It is hard for me now not to have empathy for how people's lives are going to be changed by new technology, but also to have empathy for all the other times I dove into something new, not realizing how upsetting and completely upheaving it was for others. My journey's not done, and I'm still excited on where it's going to go. End of part 4.